Julian here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make lo-fi house like Ross from Friends. As usual, you can copy the project file and MIDI and presets and samples and all that stuff from this video in the description on my Bandcamp. If you want to support this channel or me, it's a great way to do it. If you just want to get the project file from this video, it's also a great way to do it. So yeah, check that out, and let's dive in. So, I have this project file in front of me. It's the one you heard in the intro. We're at 125 BPM, pretty standard kind of house tempo. And I'm just going to go layer by layer and break it down. So the first thing I have here is a sample loop, which sounds like this on its own. Now, what I started with was this. So, considerably different than this. But basically, what I did was, I took it in here, I pitched it up +3. I'll take off the processing and you can hear what's going on. But yeah, so I pitched it up +3, and I warped it, obviously, so it's in time with the song. And what this pitching it up kind of just does is, well, for one, when you speed something up, it tends to sound more natural when you pitch it up. But also, the pitching it up just kind of helps with giving it that more kind of like dirty sampled vibe that I hear a lot in Ross from Friends music. So yeah, I just figured I would add that on there. You'll notice I also turned this detune down 30 cents. This isn't a huge detail if you're like a beginner or not really familiar with this stuff. You're not really missing too much, but if you don't figure this out. But essentially what the detune is doing is it kind of like moves the pitch in between these semitones. So this transpose knob moves it up like 1 or 2 semitones or however many up you want to go, and then this detune sort of allows you to go between there. What can happen a lot of times when you're working with samples, and why this is very useful, is basically sometimes your samples can be like slightly out of tune, like especially with things that are recorded from vinyl or like recorded from a cassette or something like that. It can just tend to sort of warp the pitch a little bit and take it to these spots that are a little bit out of tune from like the standard notes, if that makes any sense. So what you have to do is just play around with this detune. So that's what I did here, just to make it kind of fit the other melodic elements a little bit better. And yeah, then after that, as far as processing goes, I have a few things. So the first thing I have here is this auto filter, which is just doing a low pass, and this just helps to give it that kind of like lo-fi house kind of darker sound. Yeah, and I have a little bit of resonance on there, which you're going to see in a second when I turn the saturator on. That kind of like works with the saturator to make it a little bit fatter and a little bit grittier. So I also have the saturator on here. I'm using the A Bit Warmer preset from Ableton Saturator. If you go under Audio Effects, under Saturator, it's the first one. And I'm just using it here to beef this up a little bit. The thing I like about A Bit Warmer is that it's a nice way to just quickly give your sounds a little bit of grit and a little bit of warmth, as the title will probably suggest. And the thing with the resonance that I was talking about earlier is, basically, by giving it that little bump there, what happens is when it goes into this A Bit Warmer, just in that sort of range, like around here, you're giving the saturator a little bit more signal, so that particular frequency range is essentially going to be more distorted. The way a saturator or any distortion works is basically it just takes the amount of signal that it's getting in and then beefs that up. So like it's relative. So if you have one range in your frequency spectrum that is a little bit louder than the other ones, that range is going to be a little bit more distorted than the other ones. So this is kind of happening here. You can hear in that like mid-Z area. You know, it's getting a little bit grittier, and if I turn this resonance down, you can see it makes a big difference. So I like to just kind of add little bumps like that. And yeah, and then the only other thing I have on here is I have this compressor on here, which is side chaining it to the kick. Pretty straightforward. Now, I do want to talk quickly about sample selection. So if you notice, I'll play you the original sample. But if you notice, this sample is kind of like sort of like a smooth jazz, kind of like 80s, 90s R&B style sample. And these are the kind of samples you want to find for this style. Like, especially when they got that snare in the middle. You hear that little bump. It's like in halftime from the house beat, essentially. This is really cool. This is the kind of stuff you want to find. Like, if you're trying to find samples in the style of Ross and Friends, or really lo-fi house in general, it's these kind of songs. So I recommend checking out a lot of like 80s, 90s smooth jazz kind of R&B type of stuff. And yeah, so the next layer I will show you is the bass, which sounds like this. And the bass is very simple. I just have it playing these two notes that just kind of fit with the sample. Yeah, and all it is it's a really simple respace patch. So if you don't know what a respace is, it's essentially two saw waves detuned and then going through a low pass filter. So that's what I did here. I have two saw waves in operator. There you go. And then I have them detuned slightly. I really didn't do it that much with this one because I wanted it to be smoother. And since there was kind of some weird pitch stuff going on with the sample like I was talking about earlier, I didn't want to have it be detuned too much because if you turn this fine up, this is what's causing the detuning effect. If you turn this fine pitch up, you can get like a more pronounced effect. But with samples and all that, I try to keep it down just so it's not as powerful and taking over everything. And then, like I said, the only other thing that's on here is this low pass filter, which is just filtering at the high end. And yeah, that's what gives it that kind of like watery, low bass sound. And then as far as processing goes, all I have is a compressor, which is sidechaining it to the kick, just like the sample loop. The next thing here is this lead, which sounds like this. So, I didn't quite nail exactly the Talk to Me You'll Understand lead, but I tried to get as close as possible, and I know pretty much what's going on with it, so I can explain that to you. So basically, the way that this sound is working is it's basically a square wave going into this bandpass filter, which has key tracking on. What key tracking is essentially basically what note you play on the keyboard is going to dictate where the filter is within a certain range. Like, obviously, you know, the filter isn't going to completely open, but when you get up to those higher ranges, you can hear the filters opening up. So this is what gives you that kind of effect. I noticed with the Talk to Me You'll Understand lead, and a lot of Ross from Friends synths, because he really is great at making synth sounds, and I wanted to cover this in this video. But this is a popular effect, and what it does is it essentially allows you, especially when you have like a lead line like this that kind of goes across the keyboard a lot, like how it goes from up there to down there, and then there's this other one that's an octave down here. It gives you like a different sort of timbre on each note, and it's a really cool effect. So the way you do it with operator is basically you right click on the frequency here, and then you can hit play by key. And then I'm not going to do it now because it'll move the frequency, the actual filter frequency. But then what it's going to do is it's going to turn up this frequency key little knob here, I guess. Usually, I think it turns it up to 100%. I turn it up to 170. It's just kind of a matter of listening to it and playing around with it. But yeah, I think this is a very important effect because it really helps bring the synth to life. And it makes it less like just sort of static and more dynamic. So that's what I did there. Now, as far as the synth sound, like I said, it's just a square wave. I guess I put it down an octave, but that's just relative. I do have a little bit of white noise in there. It doesn't really come through on those lower notes, but on the top notes, it just helps give it a little bit of kind of like lo-fi grit. So I wanted to add that. Now, I also do have this LFO on here, which is just doing a little pitch LFO. Like, I'll show you. If I turn it off, you can hear it's just giving it that little bit of vibrato. And the way I did this was it already comes pretty much routed to the pitches of every oscillator. But all I did was just turn the amount down a bunch because it's kind of what you have to do to get this to work. Because if you keep it up, it's not really usable. But if you put it down to like 5 or 6 or 7% usually, you can get a very nice kind of musical vibrato effect. Then I just turn the rate up. And then like I said, as far as the filter goes, it's just a bandpass with the key tracking. And that's how you get that kind of like multi-timbral kind of sound, I guess. Now as far as effects go on this sound, I do have a reverb on here, which is basically just set to give it a little bit of space, but like with a lot of control. So what I have is the dry wet is up a lot. It's at 70%, but the size is down almost all the way, and the decay time is down a bunch. So It's not like a long reverb, it's just giving it a little bit of space. I'll show you without the reverb. It was a little bit too dry. One thing I noticed about Ross from Friends and his synths that he's very good at doing is he's very good at making his synths kind of like come to life and making them feel more than just like a digital cold synth. And I think reverb tricks like this really help. So yeah, I did that. After that, I just have a bit warmer Saturator on there, just like with the sample. It's just a nice way to give it a little bit of kind of grit and make it a little bit rougher around the edges. I'll show you without that. So yeah, you can hear it kind of coming through a lot there, and obviously it's beefing it up quite a bit. And then the next thing I have here is this limiter. So what I did with this limiter was basically I just kind of turned the gain up a bunch. But what this does is it works with the reverb, and it just helps to kind of like blow it out a little bit more and give it more of like a lo-fi kind of like over-compressed sound. So here's without the limiter. I'll turn the volume up. So yeah, it just didn't feel like as powerful, whereas when I turn this limiter on, you can hear the tail from the reverb is a lot more pronounced, and it's coming through a lot more, and it kind of feels like this limiter is just sort of squashing everything and like forcing it all to be as loud as everything else. So it's a nice way to, again, just kind of give it that like squashed lo-fi type of sound. And yeah, then the only other thing I have on here is this EQ8. So this might look like a strange EQ for a lead, but basically this EQ is kind of just giving it a little bit more of a lo-fi characteristic because I'm cutting out the high end, and then boosting this low end area here. Which with this synth is mostly coming in with these lower notes actually. And you can hear it's just giving it like a little bit of a boost around this area, as you would probably imagine, because I boosted this area of the frequency spectrum. But yeah, so like what this is basically doing is it's just kind of giving it like more of a resonant kind of like sound. And again, just sort of making it more lo-fi and more sort of blown out. Here's without the EQ. That just felt a little bit too dry, but then when you put the EQ on, yeah, like I said, it's just bringing out some resonance there and kind of like beefing it up a bit. So that's pretty much it for the lead. It's pretty simple. It's really more about the notes, which obviously here I kind of just have the notes from Talk to Me, You'll Understand. I wanted to try to, like I said, I wanted to try to get that kind of lead sound down. But yeah, so the next thing I will show you are the drums, which sound like this. So the drums are another major part of Ross from Friends style that I think is pretty important to take note of, because there's a lot of cool stuff going on. So to start off with, I just have this kick. It's pretty simple. I do have a bit of processing on it, so I'll show you without the processing. So yeah, it's just like a pretty dry kind of simple kick sound, but it has a very organic feel. It's not like a really, it's not a really synthy kick. It kind of feels more of like, almost like a kind of like hip hop kick. And yeah, so what I did here was I put on a bit warmer, which you can hear is really just blowing it out more. And again, taking it more in that sort of lo-fi direction. And then I added this EQ8. And what this is doing is it's cutting out the high end and then giving it this little resonance boost here, which just sort of helps to like give it more of a presence in this area, because when you cut out the high end, that's cool, but it also helps a lot to have a little boost here. You can really hear that frequency there. It's just kind of, it really makes it sound like it has high end, but it's just very lo-fi. And it just helps to give that kind of like lo-fi, almost like an illusion if you think about it. So yeah, that's the kick. And then the next thing I have here is this tom. So this is something that Ross and Friends does a lot, and I'm going to play it with the kick so you can hear it. So essentially, this is just kind of like a weird random percussion that plays in the background, and it doesn't really like take over too much space in the full mix. If I play the whole thing here, even though it's happening in a lot of those lower frequencies, it's really not like, it's not really getting in the way of the bass or anything, so it's cool to have a tom sample like this. But yeah, so what this is I'll show you the original sample. I took this tom, so just like a pretty simple kind of like drum machine style tom. And what I did was I put it into a simpler, and I put it on the one-shot mode, so I have these like fades here. I turned the fade out of all the way, and obviously shortened the sample a bunch, so it'll be tighter. And this also like helps with not having it get in the way of the bass and the kick as well, because since it's so short, it doesn't really have time to get in the way of those things. And then yeah, obviously I pitched it down. You can see -4. That's just kind of a matter of personal preference. And then I put this auto filter on here, which is a low pass. And you can see I got the little resonance bump going into this a bit warmer here. So similar to what I was saying with the synth and stuff. Again, this just gives it like a nice little bump in that frequency range going into the saturator. And it allows this area to sort of shine through because it's becoming more gritty and being brought out more by the saturator. As far as the programming goes on this, that's kind of the most important thing. Like, you can hear it's pretty simple. I just sort of have this little pattern with these 32nd notes and then the 16th notes. And yeah, I mean you can do a million different things for this. You could just have it be like a simple pattern. You wouldn't even have to have it be, as many notes as this, but I just kind of went through and played what sounded cool to me. So the next thing I will show you is the shaker. Pretty simple. It's just a really simple shaker pattern. I have it programmed in MIDI here like this. So you can see the pattern is kind of like staggered. So like the velocities go like up like this and then the middle one, the upbeat, is the loudest one, and then it goes back down. So it kind of puts emphasis on that upbeat, and this is obviously something that's pretty simple. You would probably imagine to do this already. But yeah, this is kind of like how I like to program stuff like this. And the shaker may seem like kind of a background layer, but it is important. Ross and Friends likes to use a lot of percussion and like a lot of layers of it, so it's important to have like shakers and stuff like this in the background. Now, as far as processing goes on this, I have an auto filter just doing like a simple low pass, which you can hear is very important with this sound. You can see I cut off really just like the very high highs, but that's like making a huge difference. And it really gives it the lo-fi sound, because those high highs are what kind of take away from the lo-fi sound if I play this in the whole mix. You can see when I turn that low-pass filter on, it definitely feels like it's fitting into the mix a lot better, and it's helping keep up like the sort of lo-fi illusion. Like I was saying, like you kind of want to think of this as like an illusion. Like you want people to be hearing this and think like, oh, this sounds like I'm listening to a cassette or something like that. And a great way to do that is, again, with these low-pass filters. So I just have that, and then I do have a resonance boost there, because if you listen, when I turn it off, you can barely hear it. So essentially what I'm really doing is just kind of like isolating this area and just making sure that's like what you hear the most. Now I do have a little bit of track delay on this. It just gives it a little bit of kind of more of a groove. You can hear when I turn it off, it feels a lot more straightforward, and when it's on, it gives it a lot more, like I said, like a groove, and it just helps it kind of feel more human and real. So you don't know what track delay is. It is, you turn it on by turning on this little D icon down here, and you see you get this little knob over here. And what it essentially does is it just moves the contents of your track over like a certain amount of milliseconds to the right. It will literally be the same as if I just went in this case I have it on 10 milliseconds. It'll be the same thing as if I just went into the arrangement view and moved this clip over 10 milliseconds. I don't know exactly where 10 milliseconds would be, but yeah. The only reason why it's a little bit easier to use the track delay is just because it's a little easier to work with. You know, you can turn it up and down. You don't have to like keep moving things around, and everything stays very uniform and easy to work with in the arrangement view. So that's why I use the track delay on that. Now, the next thing I will show you is the clap, which is actually 2 layers, and it sounds like this. So what it is it's this clap, and then the snare. So on the clap, I just have, it's pretty simple. It's just obviously playing this kind of pattern, and the raw sample sounds like this. My bad. the raw sample sounds like this. So you can hear it's just like a pretty punchy, kind of simple clap sound. But obviously it's not sounding very lo-fi. So what I did was I put this low pass filter on. And again, same thing as always. I gave it a little resonance boost to kind of highlight this area. And then I have it going into this a bit warmer, which you can hear just kind of ties it all together and gives it that last little like oomph to kind of like make it have that lo-fi clap kind of sound that Ross from Friends uses a lot. I was really trying to nail his clap sound because he's really good at getting these kind of like dirty lo-fi claps. And yeah. So that's one layer, but on its own, it really didn't have enough power. I mean, it works, but it didn't quite have enough in the lower range of like the kind of clap snare domain. So I added the snare, which you can hear does have a lot going on in that lower range. And yeah, this is pretty simple. Again, the raw sample sounds like this. So just like a pretty simple kind of like, almost like an 808 style snare. And then what I did was I put it through the same processing as the clap. I literally just copied it down. And you can hear it's just giving it like a nice little boost in the mids area for the clap. When you play them together on their own, it sounds like the snare is a little bit overpowering, but I think it gives it a nice element, again, just to sort of help boost it and make it like a little bit more of like a clap as opposed to like, or more of like a real kind of like organic style clap as opposed to like a very clean like 808 or 909 style clap. So yeah, so the next thing here is this little hi-hat, which is pretty simple. It's actually 2 layers. It's this layer and then this one. And so what I've done here is I've taken this hi-hat sample, and basically I have it just in a simpler, pretty simple. I'll show you the original sample. So yeah, just like a simple kind of like, again, like a drum machine style hi-hat. But obviously that has quite a bit of high end, so I've done a bit of stuff. The first thing I did was I actually converted it to mono. I think it was just having a little bit of weird stuff going on in the left ear, or in the right ear or something. So I just converted it to mono using the left ear on this utility, so I wouldn't have any problems with like phasing or anything like that. And then I have an auto filter, again, low pass with a little bit of a resonance boost. So that just kind of really like gives it the lo-fi effect. And then I have it going into this a bit warmer, which just sort of seals the deal and ties it all together at the end with making it kind of like gritty and rough. And then under that I have this tambourine sample, which has the same processing. I'll show you the original one here, and I'll explain why I did this in a second. So here's the tambourine sample. So yeah, just like a simple tambourine sample. You probably have a million of them on your hard drive. But I just put it into the simpler, and it's got the same processing as the hi-hat save for the utility. I didn't need to convert this one to mono. But yeah, this is just a nice layer under this hi-hat. The thing is, this hi-hat sounded good, but I noticed that Ross and Friends hi-hats tend to have a little bit of like a high-end kind of like, tinge to them in like the very, very high end. So I wanted to add this tambourine and just give it that little bit of extra kind of sauce on top of it, I guess. Yeah, and then the only other thing I have down here is this cassette noise, which sounds like this. It's very quiet. It's just in the background, giving it a little bit of texture. And then all I have to process that is this EQ8. I'll play you without the EQ8. You can hear there's a lot of low end, and there's a bit of high end as well. It doesn't really sound very lo-fi, so I've just cut that out, and I basically just made a bandpass with this. You can really do this with a bandpass filter, but the reason why I did it with the EQ8 is because it's a little bit more controllable, and I wanted to give it this little bump here, which would have been kind of hard to do with a bandpass filter since the sweep is sort of in the middle. So yeah, pretty simple. It's just in there giving it some texture in the background. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, the main things to think about are like the type of samples you're looking for. Again, you want to look for those sort of like 80s, 90s kind of like smooth jazz, R&B type vibes. And then the synth sounds, again, trying to bring them to life more. doing things to like not make them just a lead, like a simple, saw wave with a filter on it or something like that. And then with the drums, just doing things a little bit outside of the box, like again adding weird percussion like this tom. Really helps because it's very much about having a big kind of layered sound with this style. So that's gonna be it for today, guys. Make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And you can get the sample pack and project file and MIDI and presets and all that from this video in the description. So make sure to check that out as well. And I will see you guys again tomorrow with another tutorial.